Hi, everyone. This is Kyla from Hidden Gems Literary Emporium, your family-owned nonprofit community bookstore. And today we have a very special guest. His name is Paul Payten, and he's the author of this book, Living with a Vagina. Show me yours, I'll show you mine. And you are from Australia, correct?
Correct. 7th generation Australian.
All right now. And you are actually in tomorrow in my world.
That's correct. Yes, it is. It's Thursday morning, 11 a.m.
Right, and it's Wednesday night here, so that's just kind of interesting. Okay, so why don't you start by introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about the book, and then we'll get into it.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, Kayla. Firstly, as we do here in Australia very often, and probably other parts of the world who are now recognizing original cultures and original peoples, I would like to acknowledge that I'm on unceded territory called the Yuin Nation, which was one of the 300 plus nations that were across Australia for the last minimum 60,000 years, the oldest living civilization. So that's where I'm sitting. That's on the far south coast of New South Wales, which is on the east coast of Australia. And I'm here sitting looking out over the Pacific Ocean, would you believe? So I'm very fortunate. And indeed, I've come in from a family of 3 older sisters, a very strong mother, and a father who was often not around because he was very busy with his community. He was a minister of the Church of England. And he became that before I was born. I was born into the situation where he was running a parish on the coast in Sydney. And I was brought up basically by my 3 sisters and my mother, which means that in many situations I could have been spoiled or a mummy's boy or things like that. But early on, my mum said to my sisters, do not spoil him, treat him like a boy, like, be normal with him, be regular, because we don't want to pamper him. And so I did. And I got to learn how it was to be yet with girls, with women in their world, though I was always conscious that I was different, which was good. And in fact, when I was about 38 or so, my mother said to me, you know what, or maybe it was 40, anyway, around then, my mother said, you know what, I sometimes regret telling your sisters not to spoil you because I think sometimes they went too far the other way. I was the butt of their fun at times and dressed up as a little girl and taken next door as their country cousin from the, come and have tea, things like that. But they also were tomboyish. So particularly in fact, all of them became quite tomboyish and they went into life-saving clubs and so on. But as a kid, I was dragged along, but I had to go because otherwise I'd tell on them because they were doing naughty things or, so it was really quite a delightful upbringing in many ways. Coming into teenagehood, my father had left the church and gone into other areas of life. And of course, they being then older and girls, it's a whole different thing. I couldn't hit them in certain places. Then I had to treat them certain different ways, and that's fine. I grew up with that. And what it did, though, it gave me a respect for the challenges and the differences between the sexes. It was a fairly free household in the sense that we were not regimented in the church, though, and Dad not being in the church anymore, they were still very spiritual people. And very intellectually, they were reading and helping community and developing all sorts of things and raising funds for charity. And that was all I've experienced of them. And so I was, I guess, brought into the situation where going a teenager to high school, my dad wanted me to do French and Latin and become more intellectual. My mum said, no, he's got to have practicalities. Do woodwork, do tech drawing and French. So I became balanced in that way. And indeed, I used to help my dad around the house. We'd move into a house and renovate it to a level we wanted. And so he was a house painter for a while in his life. He was then a self-taught handyman, as I became. And I ended up doing stonemasonry by his side. And in fact, he descended from stonemasons, would you believe, in England. And the two brothers that were brought out on the first fleet to Australia from London in 1788 were both stonemasons. And we believe the story is that they, being stonemasons, they were desired workforce for the new country that was Australia. So they were framed, the story goes, for stealing a block of stone or several blocks of stone and then put on a ship and transported to Australia for 7 years. However, one of them, the surviving one, because the first, one of them was amongst the first hung in the colony. Within 6 months, he was hung for stealing so the story, the history is stealing a soldier's shirt in winter to keep warm. So he was hung, but the other brother survived and went on to have descendants who in fact became the father of Parramatta, which was the first big centre that was developed out of Sydney way back in the 1800s, early 1800s or late 1790s or something. And he worked with Francis Greenaway, who was a very famous architect and designer in the early days of Sydney. He built churches, he built the huge Parramatta jail. Forefather was on the name of the gate of the city sort of thing. And so we had a bit of a connection developed through the building, as it were. But meanwhile, as a teenager, I got to learn all sorts of different things. And what came into my mind was maintenance of houses, maintenance of cars, maintenance of a good life. So that has actually brought from me sustainability, which in fact I became then certified or certificated or diploma in education for sustainability at a local university. I did that only about 15 years ago. So I was a late starter into academics, and that's the only academics that I've really done. However, I've been married for a period of time, married late into a family. So I've been a stepfather, a step-grandfather, and I've now been divorced and separated about 11 and a half, 12 years. And I'm really happy to feel that I can contribute to my community. And I've been involved for the last 10 and a half years here in doing just that. But I've also, prior to that, done a lot of volunteering and in fact, creative work, whereby a friend and myself developed film festivals, independent film festivals. And two of them have actually survived. They're international. One's called the Veterans Film Festival, which runs annually now for its 5th year, I think it is. Another one's called the Sci-Fi Film Festival, similar length of time. And they're gathering films from all over the world, as we did with the initial ones. And the Veterans Film Festival, for example, is not about battles and war. It's about the life and the experience of people in the forces, all of the military forces, those who've served, serving, and so on. And we gathered a lot of interest from different countries. The Canadian Embassy in Canberra put on a full 2-hour world premiere of Hyena Road, which was a film they'd made about Afghanistan. And anyway, since then, it's now, I believe, only just 6 months ago, the local state government is talking about running it at the Opera House in Sydney. They feel it's a really worthwhile film festival, which we also felt. And it's backed by the RSL, by the Defence Force. The head of army opened the first session. And so I'm not involved and you wouldn't see my name anywhere, yet it's really exciting. It's really enlivening to think that I was part of creating something which ideally, and in fact has, helped people make and express themselves through film. So right now I've written this book, which was finished about a year and a half ago. And I've written some plays, I've written poetry most of my life. And I've just finished a stint of 5.5 years with the local Sculpture Bermagui, as we had to rename it. It's a sculpture festival that had been running for 10 years before we got involved here in this little town of Bermagui, population of 1,500 only, would you believe? But for 10 years it's been running, and people from across the state, across Australia. Well, yes, some from the other side of the country, from Perth, have even sent sculptures and attended. And I heard one day there were a couple of tourists or a group of tourists walking through, and we were saying, where are you from? And you're, oh, we always time our tours to coincide with the sculpture exhibition. Whoa, and they were from Germany and England and so on. So I ended up taking the reins of that back in 2016, and we've now got it to, it's at a wonderful event on a headland, magnificent headland above the ocean, in a beautiful big indoor venue, which is the Surf Club. And we have 11, 12,000 people come through the door. It's 9 days long. And, you know, prize money's gone up and popularity. So it's been exciting, but I've stepped off that now. So I'm now retired. No actual organized volunteering, no film festivals, no sculpture. So people are saying, when are you going to write another book? And I'm going, don't know, I'm not sure about that. Haven't got a subject yet. So, as a retiree, I do handyman work around the place. I have friends, a lot of widows and so on in this town, quite an old demographic, but also a lot of intellectuals, more PhDs in this town than many, many others per capita. So I've connected with people, and they've got this big house, or they've got a house and they haven't got anyone to do work on it. So I go and paint, or, you know, do gardening or whatever. And so that keeps me active and fit, apart from walking and swimming on the beach and so forth, and just really enjoying life. I don't know what else I can tell you.
You seem like a person who really enjoys life. And I'm so glad that you told us all of that, because it seems like you're the type of person that has many different talents, does many different things, wants to help as many people as you can. And so have you always been such a creative mind when you were a child?
I was St. George, fighting my dragon in one of the towns we moved when I was 6 and 7 years old in the country. They made a shield for me. My mother made red and blue clothes, a sword that was, so I would go out, and we have what's called a frill-neck lizard here in Australia. And it's like a dragon, and its frill comes up, and it can get maybe, I don't know, 2-3 feet long, some of them. So I'd go out into the bush, and we'd, you know, anyway, that was part of my imagination. Creatively, I don't know that I expressed it till I was about 8, when I was actually, well, let's say drafted. I was encouraged to join the local choir, the local church choir. And this was an all-male choir of about 30, 40 men and boys, but of cathedral standard. And it was called All Saints East St Kilda, and it was rather a magnificent church. And so I was initiated into that, and we were learning Latin and French and German, singing carols and, you know, amazing works, Messiah and Handel and all these amazing musical pieces, or what can I say, mostly sacred because it was in a church. But then I blossomed and I became really engaged with the idea of voice and expression and nuancing and so on. And that went for 2 years. And then I went back to Sydney and I joined the next choir that we were in. Wasn't quite the same, and it was a mixed choir. So I became a bit of a soloist at times. Then my voice broke, and then I decided to do some professional voice training, and I ended up being a wedding singer, would you believe? Not as in the movie, but singing the Lord's Prayer or something at my friends and other people's weddings. So I did it at Stedford, and I got quite good marks my first time, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So everything was put on hold, except we were doing folk songs on the side, and we formed a folk singing group and so on and so on. And then when I was at high school, for some reason, my mother decided that I had to write. So I would come home from high school and she'd say, now sit down and write at least 1 page. Doesn't matter what it's about. Oh, okay. So I got stuck in. In the end, it was almost like I had to stop for dinner or whatever, because it was really quite engaging. I don't know what the subjects were, and I've not retained any of that writing. but it's obviously served me well, because many years later, I decided to write a play, and I was part of a play reading group whereby a group of young parents, it started off looking for something to do with children, young children like yourself. They couldn't go out all the time, so they would gather at someone's home and they would read a play between them, and it became a real thing. And it was then I became involved with it. I then became president of it for 4 years or so, and then I ended up writing a prologue and what's the other one? The beginning and the end, introduction and the end of a play that was already written, a written play. So I then decided I'll write my own plays. So I did, and I had them produced in this play reading group, several, which I quite distinctly remember. And they were creative, they were imaginative, they were not based on a story. So that then came out, and then sometime later, in my married life, traveling on trains back and forth to work for 2 hours a day, 2 hours each way, a period of time, I decided I'm going to write. So I would just start writing. Today I feel pretty good, and then I would pass the time. And then I realized, hang on, and I started writing short stories. So I wrote a couple, and then something happened once, going into town on the train, and a guy was run over on the track. And he was an Aboriginal. And I got the gist that for some reason or other, he didn't want to live, and it was almost on purpose that he was there. So I crafted the story, this imaginary story around it. And it was really interesting. I haven't done anything with it. I came across it the other day. It was quite poignant at the time. And I've done other short stories about almost expressing, or how can I put it, mirroring my own life, where this young man goes to a beach and he's in a suit and he's sitting watching, and all of a sudden he sees there's some people down on the water, the place is deserted, the clouds. Anyway, long story short, and I was Once Was Bastard was the name I'd given it, and it was about this guy who all of a sudden realized that he could be free, and threw off his clothes and danced on the beach with these women. Actually, they were 3 women. So it was like mirroring of my own life. And anyway, so since then, I haven't done a lot. And then I got into the film festivals, and that was creative in the way of making it appealing, marketing it. We developed the website, the Facebook, and he was graphics and I was the words, this friend of mine. And then we brought a few others on who were doing administration and finance. And we formed a not-for-profit incorporated association, legal. So we had to do this and do that, and dot the I's and cross the T's. But it was really good, and we got to go to LA 1 year to actually see if we could promote these film festivals, or the idea of a sustainable film festival is what I came up with. So we did. Have you heard of the 48-hour film festival?
No.
Okay, it's been now 12 more years across the world, and people are given 48 hours to make a complete short film, between 3.5 and 7 minutes long. So we were running that, or he was running that in New South Wales when I joined him. So then we did the 48 green hours, and then we did 48 eco hours, and then we went to LA to meet the head of 48 hours at the Appaloosa, at the old Chinese restaurant, Chinese theater. And we spent 6 days in LA trying to work out and network, and came home, didn't quite work out. So we did our own thing. And that's where I say back to the beginning, the veterans and the sci-fi. So creativity, I suppose, has been part of my life in different ways. And I did sketching when I was traveling as a young man of 24, 25. I went from Australia to Europe overland. It took me 12 months. And then I spent 5-6 months in England. And I used to sit and sketch in a village in Bali or in Kathmandu, or I didn't do any west of Kathmandu. But anyway, I've got some sketches. So pencil, and that was exciting to see that I could actually create a picture. And I haven't done anything with those either. But yep, so I guess looking back on it, thank you for asking, Kayla. I guess I have been somewhat creative in what I do.
It definitely seems so. It definitely seems so. And, you know, sketching and drawing is not easy to do. Not everyone can, you know, draw or sketch a scene. And so you definitely seem like someone who has many talents. Wow. You should write a book about your life.
Not you too.
Oh, is everyone telling you that?
Not everyone, but I kept a diary. I left Australia with an English friend who I'd met. He was sent out to Australia to learn life because he was going home to manage the big farm in England. And it was a huge ancestral home that he lived in, which I visited when I was there. So we teamed up. I was a couple of 3 years older than he, but we became friends. And so we left Australia together, and we were going to buy a combi van in Singapore and drive across to England because he was going home. Anyway, that didn't eventuate. Meanwhile, we kept a daily diary. Sometimes he'd write, sometimes I'd write. And then when we parted in Singapore some 3, 4, 5 months later, I kept this diary going, and I've still got it. And I did a monologue once with the play reading group, looking at the diary and, oh, I remember that. And I would then talk about it and read from the diary. Since then, more recently, people said, you should write a memoirs, you know, and I'm going, oh, really? Oh, I guess I could. I've even started it, would you believe? I've got a thing called My Memoirs or something. So I haven't got very far. Equally, I don't know, I'm thinking to myself, who would really care to know about Kathmandu in 1972? I suppose a few people would, because I was there for 6 months. I was in Afghanistan just before the big invasion passing through, and the Khyber Pass was closed between Peshawar and Kabul because of the local tribal interaction. Then Russia came in later, and so on and so on and so on. But I was in some places which have really been quite since changed, and not that I could necessarily describe. I don't have photos or anything. Okay, so I'll put that on my maybe list.
Yes, I think that sounds great. Please do. And so, Living with the Vagina, is this the first book?
First solo book. I did a book with 2 other friends called Your Eco Handbook, which was like hundreds of ways of how to live more sustainably, because that's what we're all really passionate about, as is the world now. It was a similar size book, but it was with hints and processes, and we set it at the beginners, the more sophisticated, and the bigger picture type setting, these things. So, because one of the guys was a psychologist, so he took that and so on, and here am I, the practical, and the other guy was an artist and an architect. So quite an interesting combination. It sold. We got picked up by a publisher here in Sydney, Fairfax Media, but it didn't do well. It was before its time, in fact, because since then many books have come out. But this is my first solo, and people ask me about the title, which I'm not sure if you were going to or not. But
oh yes, we had to ask you about the title, and I saw you address it a little bit in the book, but I was hoping you could expound upon it a little. And then when people come into the store, they're like, Living with a Vagina, what's this book about? They pick it up, look in the back. So talk about the title and the subtitle and why you chose to name it that.
Well, I was shocked by the film, and as the book describes, I saw this film called Hysteria. And Hysteria is about England, or probably Europe. It was not factual, but it was, based on facts, or not a single story, but 1850s. And it was about how women were treated with what was called hysteria. It came down to the fact that their emotions, their physicality was driven by what was seen to be their reproductive organs. And indeed, they were therefore given a hysterectomy to cure the hysteria. In fact, that was the extreme case. Women who couldn't be cured by being medicated or tied down or something were literally committed to an asylum where they were given a hysterectomy, and that was their life from then. Milder cases and versions did occur, but that was what I'd researched and this film explained. So I'm going, that is horrific how that, and feeling and recalling how my sisters coped with their lives growing up, and how my mother then as a widow, because my father died when I was 16 and she didn't remarry, how they lived with life. And I saw some of the emotional play out and some of the uncontrolled and so forth, but also the really genuine, caring, loving side of femininity. So after this film came out, I thought, well, excuse the expression, but bloody hell, this is really something worth talking about. And so, I don't know, it just came to me. Living with a vagina is not easy. I could have done that. Or living with a vagina has its problem, or its trauma, all of this stuff. But I got as far as living with a vagina. Then I thought, okay, well, I don't have one. But at 9 weeks, everybody has both, or could be either male or female, in utero. So at some point in my development, I, let's say, did have a vagina. That aside, my particular case, when I realized what I was actually exploring was about my own physicality, my own physiology, my own difference that I was born with. And in fact, though I've never seen it, I do not recall it, seeing literally what I looked like when I was born, the expression is splayed penis, which means the ends is actually open. It's not sealed, there's no urethra and so forth. So literally I would have had for some early days what could be perceived as a vagina on the end of my penis. Strange to say, but that literally could be the reality. Well, it was the reality. But as I say, I have no reference because then I was in hospital and now I'm different. So I really don't have one anymore, yet still I'm different to the point where, stretching one's imagination, I really do have a small, it's physiologically factual, I can't deny it. My urethra is larger and it's not at the end of my penis. So it's actually a whole different structure. And this is called intersex. And when I came across the term intersex, I'm going, oh my goodness, that's amazing. I'm actually a mild version of intersex. And what I wanted to do, even when I was late 30s, I thought, because I had plastic surgery, I was altered. I thought, this is becoming a nuisance. And I know, recalling the pain and the embarrassment, and for years, no one seeing me, So it was a coming out for me, an expressing of my ownership of my own body and the emotions and how different and ridicule one can get for being different. And, as kids, they used to, well, they didn't really, but I was afraid that they would criticize or make fun of. So I'm acknowledging all of this, and you probably got to read the book to understand the beginning of where I worked out that, yes, some women are different as well. Not everybody's the same. And since my research, light as it might be, the extreme example of intersex, which then became the focus for me and still is, a man can be born with 2 fully formed penises and a woman with 2 fully formed uteruses. Now that's 1 in 25 million in America. That's the stat I saw for men. So that's pretty few men. Yet who knows if you were sitting next to someone on a bus or whatever, So this brought up the whole business again of being different without being seen to be different. And this goes to gender differentiation. It goes to the homosexuality, sexual provocation, proclivation, whatever, you know what I'm saying, inclinations, proclivities, that's what I'm trying to say. And so it actually is a really real subject, because now, for example, Interact, the largest not-profit movement for intersex, has just last month, I think it is, New York hospitals now will not do an automatic operation on an intersex person. They will actually discuss and work out and let things develop to a point where, is it inclined this way, or she or he or whatever going. So it also chimes in with the whole business of the she, her, woman, or this matter of new pronouncing, people's existence. And am I a man? Yes, but am I hetero? Yes. Am I whatever. So to me, it was really then became a really heavy subject worth talking about. So many men walking around the street, they're intersex, but they don't necessarily know. And I know I had someone respond and they said, well, I haven't heard of this. And I'm thinking, well, there's an education campaign desired here. How do we actually introduce people? Because, oh, that's right. That's what the case I was telling someone locally here, tiny village. And they said, oh, we had a guy, Ken, for example, he was always a little bit effeminate. He didn't dress as a woman, but he sometimes had inclinations or clothes in that way. And yet he was a really nice guy and he didn't interfere with anyone or anything and so on. And he was getting on. And then he started getting sick. And he got sick actually and died. They did an autopsy and they found that he had a full set of female genitalia inside, but he actually was representing externally as a male. So there are people we do not know, which then leads me to say, well, I don't know what you think about XYZ. Let's talk about it. Or if there's oh, you can't think that, well, hang on, that's me, I'm different. Which brings into the whole business of what the world needs now is acknowledgement that we are unique in all ways, inside, out, and so forth. And that's really where I think I wound up with the book over the couple of years that I wrote it. Well, that was my ideal. And hence in the back, I've got a bit of a questionnaire which sort of says, please answer these questions on your first response. What would a woman never do, for example? Or what can only a man do? Or when was the last time you saw a woman do X, Y, fill in the gap? Because to me, it actually ideally might have people thinking around their fixed ideas, or in fact, even about themselves or about others. And I figure that that's probably a pretty practical way. And I've never been lambasted or criticized for having written this book, except from my friend my film festival friend, when I was starting to write it. He said, you're not a feminist, the women will kill you. You can't be a feminist, you're a bloke. And I'm going, well, yeah, but, now there are many male feminists out there. That's only a term, but rather, and now is, of course, and this is another level as well, Kayla, we're entering the age of Aquarius, which is the feminine energy, which is, in other words, thinking about this interview this morning, my life has actually been around supporting women and the feminine, because I used to worry about my sisters at times. And because I was the only boy and the youngest, I had to be growing up to be the 6-foot bloke who looked after them. That was almost an aspiration. And they would call me their baby 6-footer. That was one of my nicknames for a while. As 13, 14, I'm as big, if not bigger. And now I'm, well, my older sister's 81. My other sister is 78. And I'm quite tower over them. It's really, they've shrunk somewhat, but equally, I think in stature grown. I don't think I've shrunk at all. At 74, I'm still very robust and physical. And so I don't know where I was going with, oh yes, that's right, except that literally I've tuned into Aquarian age, and this also comes with the Christ energy. And this, in other words, is what caring, love, compassion, understanding is, I think, what the world needs now, yet again.
I want to thank you for sharing all of that. And I want to ask, was there a specific moment in time where you knew that you needed to write this book about this topic? Or was this something that was gradual? And what were your initial feelings around this book? Were you nervous that people would judge you? Were you excited to get this topic out there? How did you feel?
Probably all of the above at different times. But initially, as I say, after the hysteria, I went with a friend of mine of a similar age who was a homeopath, very conscientious, genuine, successful homeopath. And I've only lived through, we were brought up only using natural therapies and good food and preventative actions and so forth. I'm not on any medication. Anyway, that's my story on that side of things. So we had an affinity. Meanwhile, we got talking about it. And it was interesting that in the theatre, very small theatre, only set about 50 people, I think. There were my friend and Stefan, and then there were 9 other women, 2 over here and 6, 7 down the front, all of about our age, and we knew a lot of them. And I said to him afterwards, isn't that interesting? We laughed, but they didn't, certain things. And then they laughed and we didn't. And then I thought, on occasions we laughed together, apart from the angst that I felt at times. We both did. So came away from that, I said, and I don't know exactly the instant, but I must have come home and I don't know. Yes, I don't have a clear point of, I'm going to write about this, yet it took off. Going further, as I say, with my friend, I told him about it because we were spending a lot of time together at that stage still. And he said, oh, you're going to, they'll crucify you, blah, blah. I said, no, I don't think so. But anyway, and then I guess my trick was, or my concern was, what do I call it? And this is literally what I said, living with the vagina. But then I thought, well, actually, I'll give some curiosity. You show me yours and I'll show you, and this is a guy writing a book. How come he can, and everyone said, and I'm saying the most obvious question is, have you really got a vagina? From friends who heard about this book and people talking about it. I don't think anyone's really done that blatantly. They've sort of waited for me to explain. And then when I put it to the publisher, or rather then I was, how did it work? Yes, that's right. I put it to a publishing service, a POD company, not an official publishing company. It was a publish on demand service provider. And I said this and they said, oh, really? What is it? So I don't know. They had to run with it because I was paying them, as it were. And I was going to reverse it. You show me yours, I'll show you mine, living with, and then I thought, no. So we discussed it a bit, but no, then I firmed up and that was the title. And I'm selling it off the local organic health food shop shelf at the moment. Every once in a while, a copy goes and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, I guess it's been with me for a while, and hence what came back when I started to write it seriously. And it looked like I was going to be putting effort into it. At some point in my childhood, astrology was there. And in fact, my mother had a reading done for me when I was born by an astrologer she knew. And he said somewhere, or I recall somewhere, he will write a book. Or somewhere in my mind, it was fixated, or not fixated, but it was conscious that this was going to be something that could happen or would happen. So I thought, well, okay, your eco handbook was a threesome effort, but what about me? And so I then embraced the idea of actually writing something of my own. And so that's how that came about. And yeah, I still am dubious in a way about the title, but not really. I'm seeing it as sometimes, well, what do you think it means? So it's a conversation starter, and maybe people having a book lying around on their, reading it on the train or something could, I don't know. It's a tongue-in-cheek somewhat, yet it's a very serious subject for me. In an essence, I think it is something that needs talking about. The uniqueness of each of us, the spirituality that is beyond the body, the acceptance of other physically, but also there for emotionally and so forth. So I'm stuck with it. No, I'm really quite pleased with where it's got to at this point. Yeah.
And I love the titles of the table of contents.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so I love that you embolden a phrase and then you go into it a little bit deeper. Would you say that there is one chapter that either stands out to you or you feel like would stand out to others the most?
this, interesting how it came. This list of contents was my working guide to what I was doing when I was writing a chapter. Because I'd give it a name, health and happiness. Well, what does that mean? Okay, oh, well, these are the points to work on. So I then put down hygiene, maintenance, health, blah, blah. However, somehow it got stuck and I didn't think to cross it out, all of the subtexts. However, I guess, what can I say? The myth and facts of experience. That, to me, chapter 5, I suppose, just jumped out at me then. But also, well, unseen influences, number 7. Because this, to me, is probably the most fundamental, whereby, and this is what I talk about, the matter of having empathy for, men call it testosterone, or rather when we say men's having a fit and whatever, he's full of testosterone. When women are having a meltdown or whatever, they say, oh, she's must be having a period, or it's that time of the month, or, so on and so forth. So that's often, even in films that I'm seeing currently, there's still this how can I put it, demeaning attitude of men towards women's emotionality. And so to me, that is probably the most unseen influence of all, of men and women, that literally is quite often neglected. And in fact, I was just watching a woman this morning, young intuitive psychic guide person who's developed a following here in Australia or across the world, but she's here in Australia. And she was talking about her, she'd been attacked by 2 dogs, would you believe? She's living on a property in the country, and these 2 big dogs out of nowhere came and attacked her. One was on one hand and the other was on a leg, and she was being pulled apart. And anyway, long story short, she went through this trauma and is now healing, but she was talking about her first bleed after this emotional and physical trauma. And she said it was really, really deep. And so that she's maybe early 30s, she's got a 12-year-old daughter. And so she was just talking so freely and so normally about this. And I'm going, well, that's life. That's what it is, And for men, I don't know that we have the same sort of ritual, I'll call it, or physical, what would it be? A line in the sand. That it's not a passage, a rite of passage monthly. And it is for a woman in many ways, because you change, women change, girls grow, and so on. And then when it stops, and my wife was already into her next stage of life when we met, and the traumas that she went through about physical, HRT, the therapy and so forth, and so to me, this is really not seen, not recognized. And my advice, albeit my recommendation, is when we see women going off, they're being hysterical. Well, actually, they're probably uncontrolled. They cannot, it's so emotional, so physically influencing that literally they have to play out. Now, again, mirroring that with a man, I don't know what it is. And I know, although I do know, as a child and a youth, my anger was something that I really came to terms with, whereby I was really afraid that I would actually lose it someday and do some real damage. My sisters, astrologer, counselors, both of them are still living, they're saying that it's about the fire. You've got so much fire in you, you've got to let it out. So how one does that varies according to the time of the day. But this is where I think literally, we just don't know what's influencing our world as individuals, male or female, that can actually be overwhelming. And, Your Honor, I lost my temper and I didn't know what I was doing. That's actually real, I'm sure, for many people. Yet, how do we acknowledge that, work with that, and accept that, and actually even forestall those uncontrollables? I'm not sure if it's possible, but that's sort of where I'm, I guess, exploring for myself as well. Yeah. So, that chapter, I guess, and just, I mentioned hermaphrodite for some reason, but it's intersex because this is an unseen influence. It's not a mental thing. It's because I'm physically different then I'm emotionally going to be and psychologically going to be acting differently. That's how I see it anyway, because we are well, our bodies are our platform. Being spiritual beings in a physical body means that our bodies limit us or enable us in certain ways. So depending on our physicality, therefore we're limited or encouraged, as it were. So yes, it goes psychological. Yeah, I guess number 7 would come out for me is really pronounced, which of
Okay.
course links with others. And I could go on
No,
for a while.
it does link with others. I want to go to chapter 7. And
Chapter 7?
yes. And so let me see, page 70. Why don't you pick out a paragraph of two from chapter 7 that you feel is maybe especially important, or something that you feel like people need to hear?
Okay.
Let me know what page you find it so I could follow along.
Page 75. Yeah,
Okay.
page 75. Self-knowledge. As longtime researcher, author, and PhD in gender equity and social philosophy, Ross Honeywell declares, it's how we think and feel that determines how we behave. If we think and feel it's okay to behave inappropriately or in a discriminatory way, we'll find ways to get around the rules. I've spent 20 years as a social researcher analyzing attitudes and behavior and the relationship between them. And I can confirm, having analyzed data from 800,000 responders across 3 continents, that it is attitudes that determine behavior, that behavior doesn't fundamentally change without attitudes changing. So why do we force on the output, on behavioral responses like rules, quotas, and compliances, when it's attitudes that are the root cause of poor behavior? Just as a point, poor behavior is his description of whatever. I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's more inappropriate or whatever. So from an article entitled, Australia is Masculinizing, Why Gender Equity is a Mindset, Not a Behavioral Problem. And this is on a website, womensagenda.com.au. A young friend of mine who I really respected once said to me, I don't feel a complete man unless I feel blood in my penis and balls. It gives me a groundedness and it enables me to feel strong and masculine, or words to that effect. That was what he said one day when we were driving along in a car. At the time, I thought, this is my kind of thinking, as I actually operate on a similar basis at times. I realized he had a very good point about how to gauge oneself, mentally or physically for that matter, check in on the tackle for blood pressure and well-being. That's a male expression, but it points to the fact that literally check our body. Where is the blood sitting? Do we have awareness of all of our body? This might be a big ask when a guy's engrossed in a mental battle or feeling afraid. What would prompt him to do so anyway, unless he had control of his thoughts and in a relatively private place? My friend was one who meditated, did yoga, and counseled his students and others. So he was conscious of his homeostasis most of the time. And I think that, I can continue reading, but that to me is really, I think, my foundational point now, that self-knowledge, if we know how we feel in our toes, if we know how we feel in our backside, and this is what meditation is about. When you sit in a chair, or so many meditation classes I've been to or whatever, feel the feet on the floor, feel your bottom on the seat of the chair. This is how we introduce ourselves to our body. But if we can live as close to being aware of our homeostasis as possible, then we'll be authentic and less reactionary and more compassionate, I feel.
Know the body, know the mind.
Yeah.
And also, if people are more comfortable and aware of their bodies, then just like you said, it could create an environment of love amongst the community, because now people are less help. I want to say they would be less they'd be more likely to have loving conversations with one another. If they can love and accept themselves, then you can love and accept other people as well. And you know, just like in your experience, you said, you know, you had this experience, but you came into a certain point of knowledge that gave you a different understanding and even a new vocabulary of how to describe things and other people and things like that. And I agree with what you're saying, that there is, at this point in time, it seems as though there's a lot of that going on. People are, you know, becoming more aware of people's differences, accepting people's differences. And so hopefully that can lead to more love amongst everyone.
I have a great faith, Kayla. I don't see it as hope, because I believe mankind will continue evolving for the better. And especially in these trying times we are at the moment, the benefit of that is that people are actually being, and I'll use the word driven, but invited and given a situation whereby they are becoming more aware of what they really want, what freedoms they have to have, what they don't want, and so forth, and who is their friend, if you like, and their tribe, for want of a better term. So that's the direction I believe thinking and feeling human beings are going. There are others who will never perhaps take this path at this point, yet I believe, and I don't want to take too, well, I believe there is actually a parting of the ways between those who are aware and thinking and loving, apart from those from who are fearful and not actually able to take themselves in a loving embrace, as it were, because they're told not to or they don't know how. And I was reminded of this. We've got a lot of going on here in Australia at the moment, and there's some wonderful people out there talking, and there's one chap who talks about the scriptures a great deal. And as he quoted, I don't know what chapter or verse it is, but there will be two in the field and one will be taken. And that's a line which says to me that we're not all going in the same direction all the time, and we've got to bring everybody with us. And no. It's if we ask, then I will inform. I'm not out there proselytizing or, you know, preaching or whatever. And that's really where it is down to the individual. And I'm respecting and loving everybody for their choice, even if I don't agree with it. And yeah, so that's sort of where I'm sitting. Thank you. And I've got to say, you guys with a not-for-profit book emporium, literary emporium, and
Yes.
giving some free books, that's got to be a thumbs up, guys.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And, you know, we really appreciate that. And we have one of our pillars is to create a platform for independent and up and coming authors so that they have a network to tap into where they can get their works out to the masses. And so we're happy to have you here at Hidden Gems. And if anyone is interested in this topic, please come by Hidden Gems Literary Emporium and get your copy. Or if you give us a call, we would be more than happy to ship it to your home. Mr. Payten, I want to thank you again for your time today. This was such an informative interview, and I know that others will enjoy it as well. If anyone has any questions or would like to ask you about anything, where can they reach you the best?
Livingwithvagina.blog. That's a WordPress blog that's happening, or paulpayten.com. That's my website. And some of the pictures I'm not really happy with, but that was done in a rush. But in the meantime, paulpayten.com, that's PAULPAYTEN, one word, .com, or livingwithavagina, one word, .blog. And I'd love to hear and talk further about this and other subjects. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Kayla.
Thank you so much. And so anybody watching this video, please feel free. And I love that. I always ask this question when we're interviewing authors, and I always love that everyone is open to questions and feedback. And I think it's important for, sometimes when you go to larger bookstores, not larger bookstores, I'm just saying, but you pick a book based on either a recommendation or maybe the cover. But the reason why we do these interviews is because we want the readers to feel a personal connection and see the face, like, okay, this is Paul, this is why he wrote this book, this is what his life is like, and they get to know the author on a personal level. And it changes the way that not only they perceive the book, but they read the book. So when people come into the bookstore, we say, visit our website and check out all of these interviews. We interview every single person, and we really would like you to get to know Paul, and Paul would like to get to know you. And so we thank you so
Great
much,
idea.
Paul.
Pleasure. Thank you. Travel well. See you on the other side.
All right, now. See you on the other side. Bye-bye.
Bye.